Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. This is .NET 7 Blazor WebAssembly JWT authentication series. So this is part 3. In this video we are going to invoke user registration endpoint from our Blazor WebAssembly application. So here is our registration endpoint and here is our Blazor WebAssembly user registration form. Let's try to consume this endpoint from this form. So first, to consume API into our Blazor WebAssembly application, we have to enable the CORS in our API project. Okay, so go to program.cs file. Here, let's implement CORS. So builder.services.add CORS. Okay, options.add policy and give a name to the policy like Blazor course, any name you can give. Okay, just a policy name. And now write the course policy. Okay, so policy is like with origin. Okay, here we have to register our client application origin, that is our Blazor WebAssembly application origin. Okay, so this is my origin. Copy it, add it here, and make sure to remove the ending slash. Okay, and then allow any header, allow any method. Okay, so before authorization, let's enable the course. Okay, and here we have to specify the name of the policy of the course. Okay, so that's all about enabling the course. Now let's move to our Blazor WebAssembly application, and in the program.cs file, here there is an HTTP instance registration, right? Here we need to register our API endpoint. Okay, so let me copy the API endpoint and add it inside of this URI. Okay, now go to our registration component. Here, let's inject the HTTP instance. Okay, HTTP client and HTTP. Okay, now using this HTTP client, we can invoke the API call. So we have already added a register method, right? So we are going to use that method. So now first let's prepare our payload. Okay, where JSON payload equal to JSON serializer. Okay, that comes from system.text.json. Okay, dot serialize. So we have to serialize our payload. So what is our payload? Form model, right? Or form model. So what is form model? Registration model. Registration model nothing but registration VM. So copy this and pass it here. Okay, we are serializing it as a JSON payload. Now where request content equals to string content. Okay, and here is the string content overload method. First we have to pass our JSON payload and we have to specify the encoding type. Okay, so encoding import the namespace dot utf8 media type, that is application slash JSON. So application slash JSON, where response equal to our HTTP instance, HTTP client instance, okay, dot post async. Okay, and it is a asynchronous method, we can await it. Okay, first parameter will be our endpoint path. So what is our endpoint path? API slash user slash register. Let me API slash user slash register. Okay, and the second parameter will be our payload, which is our request content. Based on the API response, we have to do some code changes here. Okay, so for suppose if I go to my controller, API controller, here mostly we are returning two type of response. One is success and one is bad request. When the user is already exists, email is already exist, then we are returning as bad request. So now what we are going to do means, if response dot status code equal to HTTP status code, okay, HTTP status code, and import the system.net namespace dot, we will check for bad request. Okay, that means user is already registered, email is already exist in our database, then only we are sending bad request, right? So in that case we are going to receive a error as a dictionary, because we are returning our model state, right? So it will be written as a dictionary response. Okay, we are going to read the dictionary where errors, okay, equal to await response dot content dot read from JSON async. Okay, and here we are going to define the dictionary. So dictionary of key string and value is a list of strings. Okay, if I will check for dictionary is not empty. Okay, then I am going to loop the dictionary keys. So errors. Okay, so here we are in the items we are going to get the values, right? So again inner for each loop. So I want to read the list of error messages inside of the dictionary value. Okay, so item dot value, and I will name it like error message. Okay, so now what I will do, I am going to create a variable like string API error messages. Okay, so here what I will do, API error messages, API error message. Okay, some pipe separator and error messages. Okay, I am iterating the error message collection and assigning to this API message. Okay, so that is when error happens. If it is success, okay, if it is success, then we have to check for the code like response dot status code equal to HTTP status code dot success. Okay, sorry. At that time, we have to do some navigation here, like you are successfully registered. Okay, so for that, let me create a new component. Okay, so instead of the accounts folder, let me create one more page level component. So let me name it like registration confirmation. Okay, so this is my page. Here let's give the routing. So page directive slash registration confirmation. Okay, here let me display some message like registration is successful, please log in. Okay, so here what I will do, let me copy this kind of content, HTML content, and add it here. Okay, here let me change like registration success, please log in. Okay, so now copy this route. Okay, and here we have to navigate when we got 200 success to this component. So for navigation, we have to inject here one more service. Okay, at the rate inject navigation manager. Okay, let's go navigation manager. So underscore navigation manager dot navigate to and specify the path. Okay, if at all any other internal server exception, that is we are going to write in the file. So here I am going to assign some generic message like to register the user, please try after some time. Okay, so this is the logic for API invocation. So here what I am doing, again let's go through. Inside of the register async method, I am creating my payload and invoking the registration endpoint. So if the registration endpoint returns bad request, then we are reading the all the error message and assigning to this API message variable. If the registration endpoint successful, then we are going to navigate to our registration confirmation page. Or else any other exception, we are displaying some global error here. So now this message let's display on top of the form. Okay, our server side validations. So now what I will do, inside of the mud content, let's add a if condition like string dot is null or empty. Okay, API message property. If it contains some error message, then let me display some kind of mud chip. Okay, and let's change the color to error. And here let me add p tag and bind API response. Okay, that's it. We are done with our changes. Now let's check the user registration. Okay, now go to our registration form. Open network calls to check our API call invocation. Okay, so let me register now. Okay, let's register now. Okay, we are successfully navigated to registration confirmation page. That means we are registered successfully. Here, if I check, see, This is my data, and here you can see our password is hashed. So if I try to register again now, okay, go to registration page with same email. Okay, .com. Okay, now let's try to register with already registered email address. See now, we are getting some error message, right? So that is email address is already registered. That is coming from the API. Okay, so we have successfully implemented the user registration, and also we are displaying the user error message. Okay, to make this email address centered, I can copy this deflex and justify content and add a class on this mudchip. Okay, and add it here. Now let's try again. Okay, if I try to register with same email address, okay, now it is coming centered. Okay, now we are validating user is already exist or not message from API, right? So instead of that, we can directly implement that validation into our registration validation VM also. Okay, so let's try to implement that directly here, whether the email is already registered or not by invoking a API call. Okay, so for that, first we need to create one new endpoint. Okay, so let's close all these files, go to our API project and go to user registrations services. Okay, in the I service, let me create a new method definition like boolean check user unique email. Okay, and input will be the email. So let's implement this method in our user service. Okay, so implement it. Here we have to write the logic for user is unique or not. Okay, so here where user already exists using our DB context dot user dot any, okay, dot email dot to lower equals to email dot to lower. Okay, if the user is already exist, then we have to return the opposite way. Okay, so if user is already exist, the check unique email will return false. If user is not already exist, the check user unique will return true. Okay, now go to the controller and let's create a get endpoint. Okay, so here let's add our action method. IAction check unique user email. Okay, so it will receive email as a input and it should be registered with HTTP GET, and I am going to define the URL like unique user email. Okay, so here where result equal to underscore user service dot check user email. Okay, and finally return that result. Now let's check in the Swagger page, our new endpoint. So go to Swagger and let me check whether this email is unique or not. See, I am getting false. That means this user is already registered. Okay. So something, if I change some value here and I test again, means it should return true. Okay. Now let's use this endpoint in our registration VM validator. So close these files and go to our registration validation VM. Okay. Now here we have to change. We have to write a custom method, and that custom method need to be registered with our Fluent validation rules. Okay, first let's register a method that going to invoke our API call. Private async task bool. Okay, if it is written true, then validation is no errors. If this method written false, then there is some error. Okay, let me create a method like email. Okay, string.email. Okay, so for now let's return true this method. Okay, now we have to register a rule. Okay, to register that method like must async. Okay, here it will be async and it is going to pass the value entered into the email property. Okay, and the cancellation token as a input parameters. Okay, here we can call our method by calling await unique email. Okay, and pass the value. Okay, now currently it is a normal logic. Now we have to invoke the API call, right? That means we have to inject the HTTP client instance into this registration validation model. So let me create a read-only variable for my HTTP client instance. Okay, and inject and also assign it. Okay, now using this we have to change our logic. Okay, so let's define try catch. Okay, and inside of the catch I can return false. That means there is some exception. That means I need to raise the invalid error. Okay, let me prepare the string dot URL. Okay, our endpoint. So let me copy the endpoint from here. Okay, and email is the query parameter to the API, and here we have to pass the input email. Okay, here we prepared our endpoint. Now where response await HTTP get async. Okay, and pass our URL. Okay, response dot ensure status code that going to check the status code, and if there is any error it will throw exception. Okay, so here where content equal to await response dot content and read as string async. Okay, and return convert dot to boolean content. Okay, if API returns true, that means unique, then there won't be any validation issue. If API returns false, that means user is already exist, then it will raise like issue. Okay, validation is failing. Okay, since we are injecting HTTP client, right? So we have to pass the HTTP instance into the register VM model. So here we cannot directly pass like this. Okay, to try to pass, it is not allowing for HTTP. So we have to add our lifecycle method. So protected override on initialized async. Okay. Inside of this method, let's do initialization of this form validation object. Okay, here just declare the variable. So here I forgot to add a message to my must async. Let me give a message like the message. Okay, so email is already exist. Okay, that is my message for the unique email. Okay, so let's test. Okay, so if I give fully qualified email, see, email is already exist. Now I am doing client side itself, API validation. But there is a drawback here. If you go to network calls, see every keystroke, it is sending API call. Okay, so which is not good. So what we can do? So first let's clear this. Okay, and if I empty also, it is sending API call. At least for empty validation, let's try to stop the API call. So for that, what I can do here, I will write a condition when to execute this must async. Okay, so I will add a condition like when. Okay, so when the condition satisfied within this when, okay, at that time. So here I am registering when after the must async, right? So this when I will write like only applicable for this must async. Okay, so here I will write a logic like in such a way that string is null or empty. Okay, not equal to empty I only. When the email is not empty only, execute this must async. Okay, apply second parameter like apply condition to current validator. So if I apply like this when only belongs to this whatever the rule just above it. Okay, if I place this when, okay, like this, then that when only applicable for email address. Okay, like that it will work. So now this when only works for this master sync. So when email is not empty, then only execute this. Previously we have seen email empty also API call going, right? Now API call won't invoke when the email is empty in our text field. Okay, let's try again. So enter and just focus out. Okay, if I check network calls, see there is no new network calls. These are old one. Let me clear again and check. So I am entering into email and empty. I am focusing out. If I check, there is no API call. But if I enter at least one character, see, again for each keystroke, API call is invoking. Okay, to avoid this for each keystroke, what I will do, along with not empty condition, I am going to check email condition also. Okay, to use and regex dot match, regex dot is match. Here first parameter will be the our email and second parameter will be our regular expression for Gmail. Okay, here I added random regular expression for email, and also I am using regex optional ignore casing. Okay, so here what I am doing, I am checking at least the user entered is a valid email, then only invoke this must casing. Now we are going to reduce lot of API calls. So let me show now. Let's clear the network calls and enter something. See, now there is no API call. So if I give @gmail dot, now it is some valid, right? So now for .com, it's going to invoke API calls. Okay. So that means at least we have reduced n number of API calls. Okay. Just 3 or 4 API calls going to invoke. So if you are okay with this 3 or 4 API calls, you can do API validation like this when you are using Fluent validation. If you are not okay with this approach, anyway, we have implemented our message handling here, right? When the user is already exists, we are displaying, right? We can use that one. Since now I am directly invoking API call, right? Maximum that error message won't appear now. But if you don't want to use these 3 or 4 times API calls also, then you can remove this simply the must async and when just remove this and use direct API validations. Okay. So that's all about invoking the user registration API endpoint into our Blazor WebAssembly application. Next, we are going to implement the user login where we are going to generate the JWT access token.